Hey everybody, Corey here coming at you with another knife review. Today we are taking a look at the Quitercarry IQ. This is clearly the blacked out version with the carbon fiber overlay. If you're new around here, consider subscribing. I try to put out new knife related content on a regular basis. As always, we're going to start with our size comparisons first before I start really talking about this. So here it is next to the Ontario knives. We're at number 2. I'm going to try to line them up butt to butt, and you'll see that it is a little bit smaller than the Rat 2. Now, I will say, even though I said I'd talk about the review later, this is a little deceiving, because even though these knives look like they're about the same size, the Rat 2 is infinitely more usable. The Rat 2 has infinitely better ergos, and it actually allows you to really get a full grip on the knife, whereas with the Quitercarry, I mean, you can, but it's thinner, it's not as contoured, it's a different animal. But I just want to put that out there first, because that's going to be the most relevant comparison, I think, moving forward. Here it is next to the Spyderco Paramilitary 2. Clearly we're in different worlds here. Here it is next to the, oh, can't close my PM2. Wait for that review. Here it is next to the Off-Grid knife Scorpion, my conventionally large 4-inch blade knife, which obviously completely dwarfs the Quitercarry. Here it is next to my ProTech Malibu, which you can see not substantially, well, it's smaller than the ProTech Malibu. The ProTech Malibu is much more usable, much more convenient. And then finally, last but not least, for you higher-end dudes out there who don't know anything else that I just put on the table, here is your Chris Reeve Knives Large Sebenza. All right, without further ado, let's get into the review. Okay, so first off, let's talk about this knife as a user, which is kind of a weird thing to say just by, looking at this knife. It's clearly, for lack of a better word, not meant to be a user. It is a knife. You can use it for knife things, and you can use it to cut things. But I mean, look, it is literally 100% neutral handle. It's extremely thin. I mean, it does have a deep carry pocket clip, but the clip itself is relatively small. The knife is extremely lightweight. It has a very thin blade, but long story short, for me, when I think of a user, I think of a knife with, good ergos and not a beefy blade, but just a little bit more something to work with. And even though this knife isn't exceptionally small, right? We're looking at about 3 inches here. This might be a little bit smaller than 3 inches. I'll pop something up on the screen or something like that here. But, it's really hard to hold on to, and it really doesn't have super comfortable ergos. It has no jimping. It's got a few hot spots. It's just the kind of thing where, this is clearly designed to be a very easy carry, last resort, need to cut something with my knife kind of knife. This is not meant to be like the knife you take onto the job site. You want to chop open some Amazon boxes, you want to cut some paper, open some envelopes. I mean, like, this is a perfect office knife. It's totally inoffensive, even though it's all blacked out. It's so tiny, it's so innocent. It's got this classy look as opposed to the murdery kind of look. And I mean, look at, you've got that sheep's foot style blade there. It's just a completely inoffensive knife. But again, as a user, it's fine, but it's just not going to be your work knife, and that should be pretty apparent when you're looking at this. The only other thing I'll say that I took note of, especially if you want to cut with this, the first thing I thought when I looked at this, I was like, oh, finally, a knife with pretty thin blade stock. This is going to be a crazy slicer. Out of the box, I tried cutting with this. I was so confused because it wasn't struggling with an envelope, but it was not clean and it was not easy, and I was a little bit confused. When I resharpened this on my KME, I don't know if it's just mine, I don't know if it's the angle they put on all of them, but this had an angle from the factory of like literally 30 degrees. For a knife this size, for a blade stock this thin, I mean, we're talking about, they put bevels of 25, 26 degrees on like bushcraft knives, okay? This was like I just didn't understand it. So again, I don't know if it's mine or if it's all of them, but it started cutting infinitely better when I took it down to about 22 degrees. And honestly, I would take it way lower than that. It just would have required a lot more time and effort. But I just wanted to put that out there. Mine was not a great cutter, which, you know, for what you're probably going to be using this for, maybe the occasional package, maybe the occasional like office mail, you probably want it to be a good slicer. So unless you're keen on sharpening your own stuff, that might be something that kind of hits you there. So as a user, I would say, you know, buy it for its intended purpose. You plan on it being a suit knife, an office knife, a casual, like leave it next to the front door knife, or if you just want a classy piece. But again, that's not really a user thing. That's more of like a collector thing. So that's what I have to say about this knife as a user. So as a fidgeter, well, you've got one deployment method, and it is the flipper tab. And even further to speak to that, I will say the jimping on the flipper tab is not aggressive at all. It's there, but it's not very aggressive at all. The flipper tab is also extremely short. So I mean, look, I can barely get the tip of my finger on it. What that means is that you can light switch it, but to be quite honest, it's uncomfortable. It doesn't feel natural. And when I first got the knife, I was slipping off of it like nobody's business when I was trying to light switch it. I think it's very clear that this knife is intended to be push buttoned. That is just by far, it's the best way it opens. It feels the most satisfying. It engages in the most satisfying way. It opens the most satisfying way. It needs to be push buttoned. That being said, there's no other way to open this knife. And I'm taking, I was going to say I'm taking for granted the fact that you could just open it with a two-hand, but you actually can't because the blade is literally, you know, completely recessed within the handles. So you have one option. You can push button this knife. As a fidgeter, it's not the knife. It's pretty stiff. You've only got one deployment method. And oh, by the way, just another piece of little feedback here. The lock bar here, I don't know what they were going for here. That cutout to give you access to that lock bar, I feel like it's a little bit bigger than it needs to be, and what it ends up doing is it creates this very thin, very sharp edge right there. And as a matter of fact, let's see if I can just do this real quick. So you can see it takes off fingernail. So it's not like cut you sharp, but it's sharp and it's very thin. If I'm being completely honest, it's kind of uncomfortable to disengage this knife, and that's one of the first things I noticed. So given that you only have one deployment method, given that it's relatively uncomfortable to disengage the lock bar, and given that it's not very drop shutty at all, it's hardly shake shutty, I would say that this is not going to be the best fidgeter if that's something that you're looking for. The other thing that I'll say as a fidgeter, when I want to deploy the knife, I mean, it's a tiny knife. There's only so many places you can put your hands. But on the back side, this is what it looks like. And honestly, right there on my middle finger, this edge, right there on the pocket clip, a little bit sharper than you might expect, even though you can clearly see that it was chamfered. But right there, right at the very, very, very tip, it just kind of digs into your finger. I don't know. You know, as a fidgeter, not quite there for me. So that's what I have to say about this knife as a fidgeter. Now, you may have gotten this far and thought, wow, he probably just doesn't like this knife because it's not a great user and it's not a great fidgeter. But the next thing I want to talk about is this knife as a collector. So one, Quitercarry. I would say Quitercarry is a brand that does some relatively unique stuff. Not really anything too novel, but all of their designs have something in common, and that's that they're very clean. I would argue that this is arguably the busiest design that they have. You know, we've got two tones, we've got you know, the carbon fiber with the titanium, and ooh, the murdered out blade. You know, this is not what's usual for them. But as a collector, you know, Quitercarry isn't widely available. You know, they do runs, and I would say they're not that hard to get, but you can't just go get them typically. This is also a knife that I mean, there's just nothing like it out there right now. There are other you know, executive style, gentleman's EDC kind of knives, but none of them really look like this. None of them really fit the profile that this one fits, unless you start looking at like some really obscure slip joints and things like that. I think this is a very classy, a very clean knife. It's very nice for what it is. It's got a deep carry clip, and honestly, you know, I don't want to beat it to death, but, you know, Gentleman's EDC, 100% ready to go. You need to cut threads off of your suit jacket. You need to open some mail in the office. You need to maybe open the occasional package, right? This is a knife that's not necessarily for someone who really needs a knife. This is a knife for someone who just wants a knife. And if you want to take it a step further, it's a knife for someone who wants a cool, classy knife, but not one that's too over the top and people aren't going to be like super afraid of. So really for me, as a collector, I think this is pretty cool. It's probably going to stay in my collection just because it's unique and just because it's so clean. And I did actually, this is my go-to like special occasion formal wear knife. So it does serve that purpose in my collection, and I think it serves it pretty well. So that's what I have to say about this knife from the perspective of a collector. Okay, so let's talk about this knife from the perspective of just a kind of nerd. Again, speaking of the things that I talked about when I was talking about this knife from the perspective of a collector, we're dealing with something that's unique. I think this is unique. There's nothing else really out there like this right now, and in my opinion, there's nothing else that's really done this well. The transition between the titanium and the carbon fiber, it's just flawless. It's absolutely flawlessly executed. The way the deep carry pocket clip is executed is absolutely awesome. It's literally as deep as it could be, unless you literally made the pocket clip extend beyond the knife, right? This comes off of the tip of the handle. It just doesn't get any deeper than that. The design is just very clean. The carbon fiber is gorgeous. The type of carbon fiber that they use here, I don't know if that's a weave or whatever you want to call it. I think the blade is very sleek. I think it's very classy. I think their branding is very nice. That's what they do. Everything's simple, right? Quitercarry. There you go. They want to get crazy. They put a couple of dots on here. And really, while we're here, as a nerd, look at that super, super fine, very, very thin micro milling. Look at all those lines in there. That's not an accident. Those aren't lines that were just left by the machine as part of the process. That was intended. That's really cool, and believe it or not, it actually does provide traction. You can actually feel that. This knife has a lot of cool little details, and the fact that it's so unique, it's really something that kind of elevates it in terms of, if you want to nerd out over this knife. It's so delicate, it's so intricate, it's so fine, and it's so well crafted. That it's really something that I just end up enjoying, and it's why I can't get rid of this knife, even though honestly I basically never carry it. Every time I see it, it brings me joy, but like I said, aside from wearing a suit or going somewhere fancy, this really doesn't see any use in my life. But because it's so cool, it's so sleek, it's so unique, I keep it. So that's how I feel about it as a nerd. So finally, really, will I be keeping the Quitercarry IQ? As of right now, the answer is kind of yes. Again, it's kind of in a position where I carry it like maybe 4 times a year for special occasions, fancy occasions, and I'm kind of at a point in my collecting career where I'm really wondering if that's the kind of knife that I want in my collection, because I kind of lean towards knives that I look at them and I just know that I could pick them up for any occasion. Like you just glance at it and you go, you know what, I'm taking that knife today. This is not that knife. This is the kind of knife I look at it and I remember how cool it is, but I think, I might actually have to use my knife today, so I don't want to actually take this one with me. It's a nice talking piece. It's a really cool piece to show people like, hey, this is something else that a knife can be. You're used to like a blade with a big belly and it's like 4 inches long and it's got this handle with all these crazy ergos and stuff like that. No, this is like, I would show this to someone who I was also showing a watch to, or like a fancy pen or something. So in that regard, I'm still kind of on the fence here. I wouldn't be surprised if this left my collection at some point, but given that it's not really, a ton of money just sitting in a drawer, it doesn't really hurt me so much that I'm not reselling it or something like that. So I know that's kind of a roundabout way to say it, but I'd say for now, yes, but it definitely has the capacity to disappear at some point in the future. Overall, it's done really well. It's got a unique design. I think it's the kind of thing where if you like it, pick it up and you probably won't be disappointed, but you just need to go into it understanding that it's really not meant to be like your one knife that you use for everything. I mean, it's a knife, you can cut things with it, but it's not going to be comfortable if you're breaking down like a bunch of cardboard or if you're actually trying to use this at work or something for your job. Final thing I'll say, there's a little ding right there. This is PVD, this is not DLC. I barely touched this as I was pulling it out of the knife case for this video, and just a little dink on the glass. It wasn't even heavy, and you can already, you know, it chipped it. It's coming off. You know, just another reason that it should be babied and not be a user, I guess. But yeah, that's really what I have to say about the Quitercarry IQ. Cool little knife, nice little talking piece. Is it a beater? No, probably not. But I think you know that getting into it. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you all next time.